Time and time again, I watch YouTube videos and I hear other people say that they think the Ranger sucks. But what I really think is happening is your DM sucks. Today on RPG Wounds. Before we get started, when you think of a Ranger, what do you think of in your mind? Is it Legolas or is it Aragorn? Now let's put that on the hanger real quick, but we're going to get back to that. Let's first start talking about why your DM sucks if you think the Ranger sucks.
You suck, you jackass.
You know, two of my favorite YouTubers are Trent Monk and D&D Shorts, and I really love these guys. I love how they crunch numbers, and I love how they show numbers. But what are they really looking at when they're looking at Rangers and they say that the Ranger sucks?
You suck, you jackass.
I want to focus on Trent Monk because he actually does this whole to hit percentage plus damage per round, and it's really calculated and he shows you all the math. It's a lot of math, very crunchy. So if you like that stuff, I recommend Trent Monk's channel. I'll put that in the description. In his 2014 assessment of the Ranger, he labeled the Ranger about mediocre and continues to call the Ranger that in the new 2024 material. Now let me show you very quickly what he did. He did some tier 1 through tier 4 damages. When you look at tier 1, you can see that the Ranger ranks as one of the top damage giving classes. Tier 2, Rangers are somewhere in the middle now, not the top tier anymore. But then when you start looking at tier 3, you can see that the Rangers begins to really start dropping in this damage per round calculation that he does. And tier 4, essentially the same as tier 3, low amount of damage that the Ranger can do. And you can see here that he goes on to calculate who just does the maximum amount of damage at these later levels, and they show that the Great Sword and the Eldritch Blast are two of the attacks that can probably do the most amount of damage all the way up to 20th level. But how many of us actually play the 20th level? Or 15th level, or any of those levels? Well, we kind of know the answer. Here we're looking at a graph that's posted by Enrolled, which is actually from D&D Beyond, where they show where most of the level of play happens. They show levels 1 through 20, and of course this is data that they got from D&D Beyond. But if you really look at this graph, you can see that 91% of all the D&D play happens between levels 1 through 10. And even though I like how Trent Monk and D&D Shorts looks at a class in its entirety, looking at level 1 through 20 and all the different things you can do, the reality is most of us are only going to play somewhere between 3rd and 9th level, maybe up to 10th level for any of these classes. So let's focus on that for the Ranger. Now here we're going to look at the 2014 Ranger because essentially the 2025 or 24 version is just a variant of the 5.0, and in fact encompasses some of the stuff from, let's say, Xanthar's to really help boost up the Ranger. Now here we're going to focus on level of play between 2 and 10 and really focus maybe somewhere around 7, 8, 9, 10 because that's really where most of us end our characters. Now very quickly, I'm just showing you some of the things that you get as a Ranger. Here's extra attack, land stride, hide in plain sight, and that's at 10th level. There's vanish, but we're not even going to look at those because we're not really probably going to get to those levels. Maybe hide in plain sight, for sure the extra attack, and land stride. And these are really good abilities for a Ranger to have, but we're missing on some of the most important things about the Ranger that are in the 2014 edition. There's favorite enemy and natural explorer. Now, if your DM is not taking advantage of these two things for you so that you can better be playing your character in your game, he's screwing up. And these two things are two of the most powerful things that a Ranger has in his arsenal and make it above a lot of the other classes. Let's look at favorite enemy. Not only do you get a language associated with that favorite enemy, you're going to get advantage on checks against them. And look at the favorite enemies category. Has anybody really looked at these lists? We're looking at constructs, dragons, fae. Think about how many different monsters that encompasses when you say that. Which brings me back to the two pillars of RPG success that I have made in the past, but I want to focus on this GM cooperating with the PCs. You need to bring those players into the limelight. Look at those different favorite enemies and add those to your player's game. Now let's take a look at Natural Explorer, another very, very powerful ability that the Ranger has. Now there are some people who just completely think this stuff is useless, which is very shocking to me. This is a big part of what your D&D game should be about.
The 2014 Ranger worked on that philosophy, and the woodsman flavor was poured in with features like Natural Explorer and Favored Enemy. There was one problem though, those features suck.
Which leads me to believe that D&D Shorts DM really just sucks.
You suck, you jackass.
There's only a few amount of terrain types, and typically in a D&D game, you're traveling either through a bunch of forest or mountains, maybe even swamps. Now remember that level of play? Most of us are maybe going to play up to 10th level, and by then you already have 2 other terrains that are your type. So if you choose forest, mountains, and swamps, you've covered 3 of the most important terrains in all of Dungeons and Dragons. Now let's look at just a couple of these characteristics that you get when you pick your favorite terrain. Your group doesn't slow down at all during travel, except by magical means. You essentially can never be surprised. You remain alert while you're traveling in that favorite terrain. While you're tracking other creatures, it doesn't even specify if they're your favorite enemy or not. You know their exact numbers, their size, and how long ago they passed through that area. Just as an example, in my game, which takes place in a homebrewed world named Astoria, I had a half-orc character that was being chased by a mob of orcs. Her archenemy was indeed her half-sister, a full orc, who was out to revenge her father because her mother fell in love with the paladin human who was once in charge of protecting the Warhammer of Grumsh. Being severely outnumbered in this scenario, Ruba and her adventuring party, specifically a cleric, casted a fireball, allowing the group to escape. Now, they were vastly outnumbered, and there was no way they were going to be able to go at them at that moment, so they fled to the forest. Now, another thing to consider is that when she was in search of her half sister, she had to use all her tracking skills. In addition, for her to escape from these orcs, she also had to use her ranger skills so that she wouldn't be slowed down and not easily caught. But then something else happened. While her and her group were trying to escape from these orcs, they went into a forest and she cast Pass Without a Trace. Now, that is one of those situations where the player gets it on the DM, but the DM should never try to get revenge on that player for doing something that you weren't expecting. I did not know she had Pass Without a Trace. So, what I simply did is I created a grid system where I would randomly place squads heading to. They would say the path that they're traveling through, and then I would announce where my squads were within that grid system. And that was the only way that I could actually try to capture them or try to get in some type of melee combat with them. Now, as you guys know, the Ranger doesn't have a lot of spells, but I think those spells are some of the most powerful spells that there are in the game when you really think about how you should be running D&D, or at least how I perceive you should be running D&D. So now I'm just pointing to what I think are the quintessential spells of a Ranger. We have Hunter's Mark, Cordon of Arrows, and if you get that 3rd level slot open, Conjure Barrage. And let's not forget that Pass Without a Trace, Super Critical, Long Strider, and Jump. By the time you hit 9th level, you can access all these spells. So remember earlier when I was saying, when you think of a ranger, what do you think of? Do you think of Aragorn, or do you think of Legolas? If you look at these spells, and if you watch the Lord of the Rings movies, a lot of the things you see in that movie are listed here in this spell list. We got Jump, Long Strider. You remember that scene where he's jumping across that falling bridge or jumps on that giant elephant? And how many arrows is this guy shooting in a scene? Pew, pew, pew. What about that scene that he's walking on the snow, Pass Without a Trace? Now, when you take a look at all these spells, who do they seem to be imitating the actions of in these Lord of the Rings movies? Clearly, it's Legolas. Just by adding some roleplay, you can use Cordon of Arrows, Conjure Barrage, Pass Without a Trace. Now, even with this 2014 edition of the Ranger, straight from the regular player's handbook, people complained about the Ranger. And again, I think it's because they're trying to figure out how much damage can I do per round. And
Hulk. Smash.
You're playing your D&D game wrong. Yes, this is very important. How much damage can I do? But there's so many other things that they're involved in D&D game or should be involved, such as just chasing somebody, tracking monsters down, tracking enemies down, going through forests, going through mountains. But because people wanted more out of the Ranger, they got this Gloomstalker. And let me tell you, this Gloomstalker is a badass. I'm not going to go through it. I'm sure a lot of you know about it. But this really, to me, put that Ranger over the top, especially if you're thinking that Legolas style and you want to be extra fast, do extra damage. This is the way to go. It's not surprising that the 2024 or D&D 5.5 edition made the Gloomstalker one of the subclasses of the Ranger. Now, if we briefly look at the 5.5 edition Ranger, you can see they're going to get about the same amount of spells. They changed it from known spells to prepared spells, which I think also increased the strength of all the different PCs who had spells as just only known spells. And they continue to have all the same spells, which I think really make the Ranger very powerful and give you that Legolas feel. In addition, they added even more spells. But as I'm sitting here and I'm trying to read this Ranger class here, something is freaking missing from this class. Favorite enemy, not that good anymore. And the Natural Explorer, garbage. It's completely out of the 2024 edition D&D 5.5. You're right. The Ranger does suck now.
You suck, you jackass.